Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed for part 2 of the July 2023 Q&A series. Part 1 is already on the channel, so if for some reason you've just clicked onto this video and you're immediately like, I should click away and watch part 1, then I guess you can do that, but
the order doesn't matter, does it?
The order doesn't really matter, so maybe just watch part 2, go back, watch part 1. But anyway, lots of good questions coming up, but before we get to them...
Today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Hetzner. With hundreds of thousands of servers spread across several locations, Hetzner is one of the biggest European web hosts and data center operators. With their strong focus on sustainability, they offer high-performance dedicated servers in their server auction. There you can find different kinds of servers, even configured ones, at incredibly low prices without a setup fee or any minimum contract period. So you can save money while acting very sustainable. Hetzner offers a vast range of server products at fantastic prices, so for more information, please check the link in the video description.
Do you plan to test Zen 4 and/or Zen 4 X3D with the new updates that allow it to use up to DDR5-8000, but at a 1:2? I believe that's the Infinity Fabric ratio. Super interested to see if it adds or subtracts anything on Zen 4 versus 13th gen.
Right. Well, yeah, it's probably something I will look at. I haven't rushed to it because we've had a heap of other stuff. Probably be another week or two before I do get to look at it. Whether it warrants its own video, hard to say. It might be something that I just add as sort of a footnote to some upcoming CPU testing. I'm not expecting it to really boost gaming performance, but anything's possible. My guess would be that keeping the Infinity Fabric at a 1:1 ratio is probably going to be the way to go for gaming. But it may offer some interesting stuff there with APUs, because I'm of the belief that it doesn't improve latency. If anything, it probably hurts latency, but it increases bandwidth. Yeah. And that could be useful for APUs. So still there may be something there that we can't test initially. But anyway, yep, I do plan to look at it, but it's probably going to be a week or two before I get to it.
Is the GPU memory bus width a PCB limitation or the actual GPU die limitation? So if AMD/Nvidia wanted to increase the memory bus width, they would have to redesign the die, right?
Yes. Well, I guess at some point it does become a PCB limitation, but no, to answer your question, it's a die limitation. I'm not sure if limitation is the right word, but that's where it would be limited in the case of something like a RTX 4060 Ti that has a 128-bit wide memory bus. So you've got 4 32-bit controllers on the die there, and that's what gets you to the 128-bit wide memory bus and somewhat limits the amount of memory you can have connected there. But as we've seen recently with the clamshell configuration, you can double the memory there. It doesn't improve memory bandwidth, but it does improve memory capacity. But anyway, yeah, to increase the memory bus, they would have to redesign the GPU die. So it's not a simple PCB upgrade, if that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think a 128-bit memory bus is sort of the cheaper way of doing things at the moment. You know, there are some complications with memory bus width and the positioning in the GPU die. You can't just sort of put it anywhere in the GPU die. They tend to need to be along certain edges in optimal positions, sort of close together. So if you've got these sort of small GPU dies, that also limits the physical size of the edges, which limits the amount of memory controllers you can put in, which is why generally we see the trend of the larger dies having more memory controllers. The smaller dies go for smaller controllers, but that's also not really an excuse, because there probably is a configuration where a small die like we're seeing for something like a RTX 4060 could be configured to have a higher memory bus width. And even something like a 192-bit bus, I think, would have solved a lot of the problems with that card. You would have been able to take it from 8 to 12 gigabytes. Same with the 4060 Ti, you'd be able to go up to 12 gig relatively easily, and more memory bandwidth. So probably wouldn't have tanked as hard compared to the previous gen model in some of those games.
It would have been a lot better product.
Yeah, so hopefully with a future generation, they'll be thinking more about those bus width designs and sort of not opting for as low as 128-bit for the really what is a mid-range product, and really just leaving that to like a 4050 or that sort of card. But again, that's the choice they made this generation, and don't think it's paid off too well.
All right, I have a bit of a sneaky suspicion that Tim might have a little bit to say on this one, only because you've said a bit about this in the past with Radeon A2 and stuff. You've been a bit confused. Do you think AMD is missing out on market share by taking too long after the 4060/4070 releases to come out with their 7600/7700 releases? So, new Radeon A3 Radeon GPUs.
Yeah, I mean, AMD doing AMD things. I mean, they've still got quite a lot of Radeon A2 supply in the market, so that's obviously a factor for them and probably impacted the 7600 launch as well with their weird sort of pricing stuff and changing at the last minute. It still seems like it's been a long time, but there's still 6800 XTs to purchase, 6950 XTs, those sorts of products can still get them. And that's going to impact, what they can do with a 7700 or 7800, which we'd be expecting to perform like an RDNA 2 product from previous years. Don't really know how much more efficient it would be. AMD was already offering good VRAM sizes, so it's not really like they could go, well, this previous gen model had 8 gig, but now we're offering 16 gig. No, they already had 16. So yeah, I think that's sort of impacting why they haven't immediately brought this to market. The dies are ready. They've, I believe, already been put into laptops. Can't quite remember if there's too many of that sort of Navi 32 die in laptops just yet, but it's ready. It should be pretty much ready to go. But I think, like with a lot of AMD things, it's kind of just like there's always an opportunity for AMD to do something and they never take it. So, I mean, how many times have we seen Nvidia does something where they produce an expensive mid-range product and everyone's like, nah, it's too expensive, not interested. And it's like, AMD, you could make a nice, cheap, affordable GPU and you're going to get a lot of sales and market share. And they're just like, no, we're not going to do that. So
it's just so painful.
Yeah.
I remember talking to the AMD reps on the phone when the 7900 XT was launched, and it was $900, wasn't it?
Yeah,
I'm not making that
which
up.
is crazy, but yeah, it was.
When it was $900 and they're asking what my review was going to be like, and I'm like, this. And at the time, that was the product that they were focused on. They had the most stock for.
Yeah, not the XTX, which was the clearly better product.
So they had the most 7900 XTs. That was the product they were focused on. And they're like, what do you think about that product? And I'm like, it's very bad at $900, like utter garbage. And they were shocked. And I'm like, why is the price so bad for this product? It doesn't even make any sense compared to the 1700 XTX. It needs to be like $800 max. And they were a bit confused by that. And I said, I guarantee you within like a month, 2 months max, this will be an $800 product and it'll probably go as low as like $700. And they were like, well, we'll see if you're right. And, because we've seen it time and time again, it happened. And was it only like a month that it lost $100?
You'd have to check my pricing updates. We could probably put that information on the screen,
Sure.
the charts there. But
I think it was about a month.
It's been quick this generation.
It wasn't much more than a month. And it's like, why? Why release it for $900 and get slammed universally when you could just drop it to $800 and did anyway?
Yeah.
I don't know what their internal process is, but I don't know who at AMD was like, oh, this will actually sell okay, or, this won't be too poor. Like, the only conclusion you could have drawn if you had the data and looked at it was that there is no way this is selling for $900. This is at best an $800 product, and even then it's not great. Like, that should have been the internal feedback, and they should have never tried to target $900 because they just look silly every time. And I swear that product's been like $700, hasn't it? Like $720 or something like that. That's been.
I think the absolute.
It was an ASRock card on Newegg for like $720 or something just the other week.
Yeah, I think flash sales have gotten it down to $700. It's been pretty consistently $750 though, which is still a big.
$750 is
big discount.
If it launched at $750, it would have got pretty rave reviews, I think, because
I think so.
That's a really good price.
Yeah, I agree that they've got some internal issues with their sort of marketing and feedback. I mean, just the marketing in general to the public is not amazing, but then internally, it wasn't even like the performance of the card should have said that the $900 to $1,000 difference between XT and XTX was going to be a problem. It was even just the specifications of the card itself made it very unlikely that there would be a performance margin to justify that price.
So what you say, on paper it didn't make sense without even testing it.
Yeah, on paper it didn't make sense because the specs weren't there. And, we've even seen issues with, let's go back to the 7900 XTX announcement, and they were sort of talking about what performance they were expecting versus the 6950 XT, and they were expecting a much larger margin than what independent reviewers found later.
Which is so confusing as well, because if it was a year out, it's like, okay, guys, you kind of popped off a bit early on that one. But it was like a month, 2 months. Like,
they had the cards.
It was very close to launch, so that was... And it was so confusing because, again, the AMD contacts I'm speaking with, like, oh, no, your numbers are definitely wrong. Like, our internal testing has shown that it's got a larger gap over the 6950 XT. I'm like, well, your review guide's showing that it's a bit larger, but it's not as large as what you originally claimed. And then I can't find it anywhere near there. So that was a whole frustrating process because when we've triple checked our numbers and then I've spoke with other YouTubers and their numbers and margins seem the same as mine, but AMD saying, no, it's better than that. That was a very confusing situation. And ultimately AMD was wrong, which makes them, again, look just silly, just unnecessarily silly.
Yeah, like I think they need to sort of reevaluate how they're doing those sorts of internal benchmarks and sort of how it's moving up the chain to people making pricing decisions and things like that. Like I'm sure that they wouldn't have received the data that, XT is this % slower than XTX and then gone, yep, $1,000, $900, that makes sense. I'm sure there's been some miscommunication there where...
How?
I don't know. I don't know.
I know. There's no other explanation. I get where you're going, but it's just like, how?
I think there's also sometimes the executive level people don't have a great feel for how gamers actually buy products, especially when we're talking about $1,000-ish product where a lot of people would just, if you have $1,000 or $900 to spend and there's a card that's basically even the same value and it's $100 more, the vast majority of people pay the $100 more because we're talking about wealthy individuals.
You upsell.
Yeah.
You can upsell with a premium.
Yes.
You can't downsell with a premium.
Yeah.
Like, well, we've got something that's a fair bit slower, but it's not quite as good value. Do you want that?
Yeah, it's like
no, I want it to be slower but better value. Like
it's like that would work in a situation where the market you're targeting are people who can afford $900 but absolutely can't afford $1,000. But it's like, who's that person?
Yeah.
That person, like, people spending $1,000 on a GPU are, like I said, they're wealthy people who can generally afford that sort of difference.
Yeah, well, they're not even wealthy. They're just someone who has the money and wants to spend it.
Yeah, exactly. But it's sort of like maybe they saw, oh, well, the RTX 4090 is $1,600, so $1,000 is mid-range. It's like, well, if that's your thinking, that's just totally wrong. That's not how the market is thinking at the moment at all. Like, no one is buying $1,000 to replace, spending $1,000 on a GPU to replace an RTX 3070. It's just not happening. So,
put short, I think AMD needs to fundamentally change the way they're approaching the GPU market. Like, and not joking or what, like they actually need to completely change the way they view it and tackle it because the way they're doing it is just, they're going to continue to fail. They've made no inroads when they should have. RDNA 2 was good. RDNA 3 is good, despite falling short of expectations set by AMD. But they're both good products, good architectures. They should be able to sell well. And they've just gone about it the completely wrong way. There's no, RDNA 2, sure, there was the shortages or the oversupply and, or, the supply issues rather. So you could cut them some slack there. We still thought they should be prioritizing RDNA 2 more than they did. But as we noted at the time, we don't know everything that's going on. So let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. But I think in this situation, they should be doing a lot better than they are. And they're not, I don't know what the mindset is over there at AMD, but NVIDIA's already doing the wrong thing in our opinion, and they're not getting great sales because of it. But they've got the market share, the mind share, all of that stuff. AMD's not in a position, and never have been in a position, where they can be like, how much is NVIDIA charging? Oh yeah, 10% off and we'll call it good. That's not the situation you're in AMD. You are completely delusional. You need to price your products well below what NVIDIA's doing.
Especially at the high end.
Yeah. For multiple reasons though, like, first of all, make it too good to ignore for gamers who are like, only have, NVIDIA vision. And so you get positive reviews. That's like, the thing that's so frustrating about all of this is they did it with Ryzen. They had an inferior gaming processor. Everyone knew it was inferior. We knew, like we did countless videos about why the 8700K is a better gaming CPU. It's faster now. The 8700K will always be faster than the 2700X. It is the superior gaming CPU. But it was like $360. And the 2700X was selling for what, like $150 or something at one point? So it's less than half the price. So that's justification for buying it. It's like, it's not the most superior gaming CPU, but the game performance is good enough. It's a stable CPU. It's on a great platform, which proved to be truer and truer as time went by. You can buy a 5800X 3D now, and that's an awesome gaming CPU. But they did it with Ryzen. They priced the CPUs where they needed to be. They weren't like, well, we're not quite as fast as an 8700K. Just knock $30 off and call it good.
If they'd done that,
it would have been
AMD would have died as a company.
Yeah, they would have. But for some reason, they think that they don't need to do that with the Radeon division. It makes no sense.
And I think what we were saying at the start of this question as well was NVIDIA keeps giving AMD softballs. They throw a really slow pitch and it's coming straight at their head, which is GPUs are badly priced in the mid-range. How will you respond? It's coming straight for them and they swing and miss every time.
They just run in front of the ball and get knocked out.
It's crazy. It's
mind-blowing.
It's what are people talking about in the enthusiast market at the moment? Enthusiast market drives a lot of gaming PC sales, right? Everyone is talking about GPUs are too expensive. Everyone's saying this. People $400 GPUs are all bad. All the options are bad. At $600, bad. There's 4070 Ti at $800, bad. Bad value products. We're not interested. 4060, bad, right? Everyone's saying this. And what does the AMD option is, let's solve that problem, right? Mm-hmm. They've got a problem there. Let's forget about margins for a little bit. If we want an actual legitimate long-term strategy to make Radeon a viable option in the market for people.
Win back some market share.
Win back market share. Win back mind share.
Yep.
And the opportunity, it's not like NVIDIA's slamming them hard. Every single product is awesome value. You've got to go out and buy NVIDIA. They're not doing that. Mm-hmm. And AMD still, despite all of this effort, is sort of just going, what about we just do what NVIDIA's doing? It's no. Stop it. Stop it.
Yeah,
it's the opportunity is there for Radeon to do something. The $400 price point right now is wide open for the taking. Mm-hmm. AMD needs to have a GPU that's new in that price tier. And the issue that they've got a lot of the time as well at the moment is a lot of these good value cards that are competing with NVIDIA's products are all old products. They're all stuff that's already been talked about and reviewed. There's no, as we've talked about, a lot of reviewers and websites, most of them, even us at times, don't go back and reevaluate a product. Mm-hmm. So something like a 6700 XT, okay, great, it's not $480 now and you can get it for $300. Again, it's not getting the hype and talk, it's not getting as talked about as a new 4060 Ti. Mm-hmm. So all they need is, they could even have refreshed it, just literally taken a 6700 XT, renamed it a 7700 XT.
Which they've done plenty of times in the past.
Done it plenty of times.
I'm not a fan of it, but go on.
Not a fan, but it's better than what they're currently doing.
It's better than what they're currently doing.
If they re-release that at $300, everyone would be talking about it.
An official price cut
with maybe a new name.
The problem is they keep doing what they're doing. As I said, they're going nowhere. They're just treading water. They're not making the inroads they need to. For some reason, they seem like they don't want to.
Which doesn't make sense. If you look at I know that a lot of PC shipments and stuff are trending down, and we're in a bit of a downturn at the moment because of various economic factors. But I think it's hard to deny that PC gaming is growing as a segment. Mm-hmm. And it has grown over the years.
Well, it's going to continue to.
Gaming just in general is growing.
Yep.
And so PC gaming has been growing and improving, and it's better now than it's been in many years, apart from obviously issues that we're facing at the moment. And so they need to be on top of this sort of market. And there's AI, and we need to serve epic CPUs which use up dies and wafers. These days, it doesn't seem like wafer supply is too much of a concern. TSMC are dropping prices for wafers, not necessarily cutting edge stuff, but people less interested in buying up wafers. So they need these sort of core businesses. And just gaming could be one of those core businesses for AMD outside of their CPU division. And they even just make basic mistakes again, it's they announced FSR 3 back when the RX 7900 series was announced. I believe that's when they sort of talked about FSR.
It was a knee-jerk reaction to try and make RDNA 3 seem better than what it is.
Where's that feature? Why are you talking about features from 9 months before they're available? And that's assuming it launches right now.
And that feature's not going to sell RDNA 3. Really good prices are going to sell RDNA 3.
It's not exclusive to RDNA 3.
I guess from our perspective is, we've looked at RDNA 2 be quite successful in terms of the architecture and the resulting products. We're seeing pretty much the same thing with RDNA 3, but what we're not seeing from AMD is a plan. What's their plan to win back market share? The mindshare goes along with that. Like, mindshare is a funny thing because, most people I speak to, they're like, oh, I want a GeForce GPU. What about a Radeon GPU? No, I want a GeForce GPU. Okay, why? They can't really tell you why. It's just because, a streamer uses it or they're familiar with them. They haven't used Radeon before. They've heard that maybe Radeon GPUs are bad drivers. And I've had a few different people I know quite well who have then bought a Radeon GPU and they're like, oh my God, like this is actually better experience than what I have with my GeForce GPU. The software is much better, much more polished. The features seem easier to access. There's more features. Things like Relive work just as well as Shadow Play. The AV1 encoding support works just as well as what you see on Ada Lovelace. And they're kind of a bit shocked, like, hang on, I thought this was meant to be like really janky and terrible. And the truth is, at least with the current generation stuff, there's just as many problems with GeForce GPUs as there are with Radeon GPUs, but they both generally work quite well. And I know you've talked at length about your display issues with GeForce stuff and that you use Radeon GPUs because they're actually a lot better with their display engine. We've certainly found that with flickering screens and other issues with GeForce 40 series, which apparently they just updated all the previous generation GPUs to solve that. But Balin's Balin's editing PC and my editing PC, if we put a 4090 in there, the monitors constantly flicker and stuff using Adobe Premiere. Anyway, getting sidetracked, but it's all there. They've got all the ingredients. Like, Radeon is in the best position, in my opinion, it's ever been in, and they're still just like, oh yeah, knock a little bit off the price, and that's how we compete with Nvidia. It's like, no, that's not how you compete with Nvidia. No one cares about, your 7600 for $30 less than a 4060. Everyone's just going to buy the 4060.
Again, there could be I'm sure how long is this question going for? Years.
The TikTok generation are pissed right now.
Yeah, they're like, oh my God.
They're like trying to swipe to the next one.
I think there's probably some internal metrics as well that are maybe being set too low for the Radeon division. I'm sure with RDNA 2, for example, that they did sell more cards than RDNA 1, which maybe internally was like, tick. And then they go to RDNA 3 and it's like, okay, well, we sold more RDNA 2 products, so clearly we're on the right track. We're doing the right thing. So let's just keep doing what we were doing. And, if that's their sort of internal metrics and what they're benchmarking themselves against, maybe that's either misreading the market because we've gone from crypto mining to no crypto mining. So if sales go backwards when they're thinking that sales are still going to be at that level, that's going to be an issue for them. But then, if they're sort of sitting around and saying we're comfortable with 15% market share or something like that, that's the wrong metric to be setting. It
Surely
should be,
that's...
how do we get to 30, 40, 50%? Like, what can we do to accelerate Radeon so that, we're continuing to be a dominant player. We can be a dominant player in CPUs and in GPUs. But it just seems like their strategy is not really to care all that much.
If only we'd pulled something like this before, like pulled the...
Yeah. And I mean, there's certainly hardware and software features that AMD could be executing better on. It is hard to gain market share when you don't have the fastest GPU. So the XTX is not as fast as a 4090. That makes things a little bit difficult. DLSS is still superior to FSR. FSR 3 is non-existent compared to DLSS 3. So there's challenges there. It's not like they can just price a GPU and they instantly win. But they need to take all the little things that they can to be putting themselves in a better position.
I mean, I think the 5700 XT sold pretty well, and that was in no man's land in terms of RDNA lineup. That was the flagship product.
That's one thing they can do is like, okay, sure, you're not going to get the mindshare bonus of having the fastest product, but you can take the win of having a fairly well-priced mid-range.
Yeah, it was $100 less. It didn't have ray tracing, didn't have upscaling, wasn't very power efficient. It was sort of plagued by the display driver issue, which we've touched on but couldn't really replicate, but that was a bit of a weird one. But it had problems and it had shortcomings, but by all accounts sold quite well. It was quite a popular product because it was priced $100 less than the nearest competitor. And it trounced the RTX, 2060 Super at the same price. Anyway, probably... we still doing the Q&A, or is this its own video? Should we release this as its own video?
This is the why AMD is bad at marketing video.
Yep.
Which might be in the Q&A or not. We'll see, because I swear that was like 20 minutes of question answering right there.
Well, again, for the people who like YouTube Shorts and get triggered when we talk about something, for people who get triggered when we have a discussion, a conversation, which is kind of what the Q&As are about. It's not just about addressing questions as quickly as possible. So that Tim and I catching up and having a chat about tech-related stuff.
Like 80% of that was not actually answering that question directly.
Yeah. So sorry, but not sorry. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one before we get too many more dislikes.
Why does the RTX 4060 perform relatively worse at 1440p than the RX 7600 and 6650 XT, despite all three having a 128-bit bus? So I assume this means relative, comparing like 1440p versus 1080p?
Yeah, I'm a bit confused because I don't think that is the case. I mean, within reason, I think off the top of my head, it's about... The 4060 is about 3% faster than a 7600 at 1080p. Margin of error type stuff. And I think when you go to 1440p, it basically halves the margin to about 1.5%, thereabouts.
Sure.
So, I mean, technically that's true, but we are talking about margin of error stuff here, like very low percentages.
It's hard to attribute that specifically to the memory bus width. No, it could be another factor.
Well, another factor that likely is the fact that you get 18 gigabits per second memory on the Radeon GPU and only 17 gigabits per second memory on the GeForce GPU. So the Radeon GPU does have 6% more bandwidth. So although the bus width is the same, that increase, that extra 1 gigabits per second of memory is a 6% increase. So the fact that we're seeing like a 1.5% difference there between the resolution scaling, 6% memory bandwidth probably accounts for that.
Yeah, I'd say so.
So I think that's all we're looking at there. There's really nothing else. There's no other sort of Infinity Fabric type, or Infinity Cache type optimization going on there. It's just the difference in bandwidth. All right, Tim, how far away do we think we are from seeing AMD add more than 8 cores to a single CCD on consumer CPUs? So the mainstream ones that we would buy.
So this is kind of a crystal ball type question. Really not sure on this one.
I'm holding you to this answer, by the way, so you know.
We did look up the Zen 5 CPU rumors just before, and we got 3 different answers. So one publication said 8, one said 12, and one said 16 per CCD.
So unlike rumors.
I know, it's crazy, right?
Not only that, yeah.
So that's not giving us very useful information. I don't think we can really draw too many conclusions out of that. I think for consumer CPUs, I think it would be, possible that they may go to like a 12 core, but unlikely. 16 core CPUs are still not really a super mainstream part. They're still very much for the high end enthusiast, people doing production work and things. For gaming, a 12 core at that level of performance is probably not necessary. So you have to think about if the majority of their parts they're selling are sort of in a Ryzen 7 or 5 line. Again, they probably wouldn't need that, but then they are introducing their new, like they've got Zen 4C and Zen 5C CPU core architectures, which are sort of they're like a cut down version of the primary core design that's meant for higher density applications, so servers, things like that, where you need super high density of CPU cores. Now, maybe they would bring that to a consumer platform, in which case you would see more CPU cores per CCD, but if we're talking about the fully fledged design, I'm not sure it's necessary. So we'll see what they do. But it's basically, I don't know, is the answer.
It wouldn't be as, let's say, cost efficient. And how necessary is it? Because applications where you're wanting more than 8 cores, generally we're not talking about gaming. So, and then CCD latency is generally not a big problem there. So they're sort of, it wouldn't be really addressing a problem that we're having really. And again, what we really need is faster cores. So if you get faster cores, then 8 cores is going to be plenty for gaming, and that sort of solves the latency problem there anyway.
Yeah. And AMD's bringing back Threadripper as well by the all likelihood, especially with the Zen 4 design. So that's going to serve the market of above 16 cores for really high productivity users. And I would imagine Zen 5 is going to have something like that as well. So I guess they're sort of going to be balancing the whole, do we need the CCDs to be denser to improve servers, or do we need it to be denser to improve gaming? And I think, to be honest, what would probably be a better choice is if they've got a certain amount of die space to use, to continue increasing the cache capacity as opposed to increasing the number of cores. Because if they've got more space to use and they could put, let's say, 4 extra cores, take it from an 8 to 12 core CCD, or making the non-Vcache models have significantly more cache, or maybe beef up the memory control or something like that, that's probably going to have a bigger impact for gaming, and it's probably what I would suggest they should do.
Faster cores. I mean, we looked at this a while ago when there was the whole core debate for gaming, which seemed a bit silly to us. We looked at more cores versus more cache, found out that, the cache was attributing for bigger performance uplifts. I think it was the 10th gen core series, going from a Core i5 to a Core i9. It was really about the increase in L3 cache opposed to the increase in cores. Anyway, and I think that trend will continue for some time because I haven't really seen any evidence that games are starting to require more cores, more CPU power than what you can get out of a high-end 8-core. Anyway, we'll move on to the next one, I think. Tim, I'm going to need some quotation marks around esports when I say that. So, has esports, thank you, become the new marketing excuse for making GPUs that don't have enough VRAM and are incapable of running above 1080p? I haven't really seen any evidence that that's the case. Have you?
Doesn't seem to be a huge marketing trend this generation. We've seen it in the past with the super low-end sort of things. APUs are typically marketed for esports gaming, which makes sense. But yeah, not like the models that we've got right now are not the lowest of the low-end models. Both AMD and Nvidia could still release something below like a 4060 or 7600, which then may be into like esports territory. But it didn't seem like they're really... They were definitely trying to justify having only 8 gig, but it didn't seem like they were going the full esports
No,
route.
there was probably, if anything, it was primarily your sort of latest and greatest cutting edge single player titles that they seem to be promoting in the review guide and to media.
Well, was it the 4060 or 4060 Ti had the Cyberpunk preview at 1080p using
DLSS ray tracing.
Ray tracing. To sort of show that the card could do that. So I think they're sort of going with the whole 1080p angle, definitely. Sort of saying a $400 GPU suitable for 1080p, which I think we would both disagree with.
Well, disagree that shouldn't be the case anyway.
Yeah, shouldn't be the case. But yeah, I think if it comes to like esports gaming, again, you really don't even need the power of like a 4060 Ti for esports, a lot of esports type gaming, depending on the game you're playing, of course. But like a CSGO, you don't need that.
You're less likely to require that processing power when compared to someone playing Hogwarts Legacy or, I don't know, Jedi Survivor or something like that. All right, we had a similar question to this, but I know this is going to keep coming up probably every month, so we'll address this in maybe a slightly different way. How is it possible to trust reviews numbers now that you have shown that a card with full VRAM can just avoid loading textures instead of stuttering? How long has this happened, and how many other things can a game not render when lacking the GPU resources? It completely killed my trust in reviews where they did not specifically mention that was taken into account with proper image quality comparison. Okay, so...
It's a great question.
It's a great question, and it's not wrong in any way, because it's a great question. But also, the response is quite nuanced, quite difficult to get there. So first of all, should your trust in reviews change with this new information? No. It's also not new information. So you've asked, like, how long has this been a thing for? It's been a thing for well before cards even had 1 gig of VRAM. It's just how it works. Like, games get to a point where they start, like, as game developers have said publicly, they're sick of optimizing the latest and greatest games to work on an 8 gigabyte card with like high and ultra settings and sometimes even medium settings, because it's taking away from other things they want to do with the game. They don't want to have to heavily optimize the game to work on 8 gigabyte cards anymore. We've had them for too long at the sort of mainstream mid-range to high end. And so you're running into all these other problems. But yeah, we had it when going from 2 to 4 and 4 to 8 and now 8 to 16. And it's just, and then I wouldn't blame any reviewers for not necessarily picking up on this because, people have told me about this in Halo. I don't really play Halo. I benchmark Halo. I played Halo for quite a few hours to get to a specific point, but I played on I think a 16 gigabyte Radeon GPU. I haven't played it extensively. Like, you can't play with every GPU. So people started reporting that their 8 gigabyte cards were starting to run into frame time issues after about 40 minutes of gameplay, and textures weren't loading and stuff like that, which I wasn't seeing in my quick benchmark tests. And you have to do some investigation. And so when I started looking into this, I think Halo was like the third go around looking at this memory problem. I thought, all right, I better look at Halo because people keep talking about it. And I had to play for about half an hour And then you get to the half an hour point, and then I'm like, hang on, that tree over there doesn't look like how it looked like earlier. And you go over there, and sure enough, the textures are all missing. And then I started to notice that rocks were missing. Same thing with Forspoken. Textures, if you looked in a spot, the textures were there. But if you looked away at another wall and then quickly back down, they weren't there, and they'd pop back in. And, pop-in textures, that's forever been a thing, right?
Yeah.
So, and popping textures, that can happen on all GPUs, or it can be a sign of not enough VRAM. And, Forspoken was a game that I think I first played on an 8GB card. I think might have even been an RTX 3070. And I was like, holy moly, this game looks awful. And I didn't even twig that it wasn't loading all the textures. And tons of gamers were saying how bad the game looked. Whether or not it warrants that much VRAM for that texture quality, I'm not going to get into that argument. But when I finally played the game on a 16GB card, I was like, oh, okay, that wall actually looks really good now that it's textured. But yeah, fine. Because running out of VRAM, there's different symptoms like frame stuttering or just loss of performance in general, or missing textures, or texture popping, texture swapping, all that sort of stuff. Because any one or multiple of those things can happen, it can be quite hard. And it can also, it's made near on impossible because it'll happen with certain, VRAM configurations, which is the problem we're talking about. But then it might only happen after, I think the Callisto protocol, I had to play for 20 minutes before it ran out of VRAM. And then it has to have ray tracing enabled for it to run out of VRAM on an 8GB card using the ultra settings. So you can see all the challenges reviewers have. There's different GPU configurations with the VRAM capacities. You have to test all of them, I suppose. But then you've got to test them all with such a massive, impossible degree of quality settings. And then you might have to play the game for 20 minutes or half an hour or 40 minutes. And it might only happen in certain sections of the game that are particularly VRAM heavy. So it's really nothing changes. Okay, where this becomes an issue is, say the Radeon RX 6800 was an 8GB card and the RTX 3070 was an 8GB card. What do you do there? It's like you review both of them and then VRAM is a non-issue. Like, it may be that those cards don't quite have enough VRAM, but it just means that both of them have to be turned down. So it's if you know what I mean, it's kind of a non-issue there, isn't it? The VRAM usage, because, you might run out of VRAM in Halo Infinite using ultra quality settings, but it means that those two products, you just have to turn it down to high. That's the compromise.
Yeah.
Where this becomes a problem is when AMD offers 16GB and Nvidia offers 8GB. And then it's like, well, this has DLSS and more mature ray tracing support, so that's good. But this offers better rasterization performance. Yeah, it's a little bit more expensive, but it has twice the VRAM. So which one do you buy? And that brings me back to my reviews from 2.5 years ago, where I said, I honestly would buy the one with twice the VRAM because I think it's going to offer you a better experience for the life of the product. And that certainly looks to be the case. But it doesn't change the review process because, again, it's about deciding on those cons and pros of each product.
Yeah, and I think most reviewers are sort of on top of these things. Like, we do rely on community feedback from people pointing out games where these issues come to play, so we can look into it and sort of go, okay, now we can compare 16 gig to 8 gig cards and various other issues that we see throughout games. And so long as, I think most reviewers do this, so long as everyone's aware that those problems exist and they're not being glossed over in reviews. Like, you wouldn't want someone to be looking at, Halo Infinite that you've just been talking about and testing that in a game with a GPU that's already known to have issues with VRAM. You won't want them to just ignore that. If it's a known issue, then as long as it's discussed, then
that's right.
I think that's people, doing a fair and reasonable job. And as you say, it's difficult for reviewers to be able to find all the different nuances in every single game. But again, so long as people are, mentioning these things when it comes to light, then I think that's people doing their sort of due diligence with those sort of products.
I mean, that's sort of how The Last of Us testing happened with me. I played that game through with an RX 6800 on a 7800X 3D test system. Actually, it might have even been just the 7700. Anyway, and I played that game for about 3 or 4 hours, and I didn't actually run into any bugs, which I guess is fortunate. You said the game was pretty bug-free for the first bit, and then it got worse as it went on.
At least for me, yeah, the second half was a lot more buggy.
Yep, so I only played the first half, and it was completely stutter-free. The original release of the game for me played perfectly fine. very smooth, very consistent frame time graph. And then I saw all the negative reviews and people saying how stuttery the game was and terrible the game was. And I started reading into them on the Steam review and noticed that a lot of those people had 8 gigabytes of VRAM, went and tested that, and sure enough, that was the problem. Same thing with Star Wars. The 7800X 3D is proven to be a really good CPU for playing Jedi Survivor. And I used an RTX 4070, which is a bit of a slower tier GPU. If I had to use the 4090, I would have seen more stuttering, but if you actually lower the frame rate, it keeps up better. And that game played really well for me, really smooth. I uploaded some gameplay footage to prove it. People were very upset that I was saying it played well on that particular one and only configuration. But yeah, that's how we find out. People were complaining and then we look into it like, okay, well, yeah, if you have a different CPU and different GPU combo. So basically a weaker CPU with a more powerful GPU seemed to be the thing that, introduced that traversal stuttering really badly. But anyway, that's pretty much it. I think we've covered that one pretty well. It's like nothing changes too much. It's just be mindful of that. But we're in a, in my opinion, a sort of transitional period between 8 and preferably probably 16 gigabytes. Like we were, previous console generation, probably midway through it, we went from 4 gigabytes to 8 gigabytes. Because for so long, the 8 gigabyte, RX 580 didn't really make sense. 4 gigabyte card was just as good. And then it's almost like without anyone noticing, that 4 gigabyte card kind of got phased out and people stopped testing with it because it didn't have enough VRAM.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with these things, it also shows that we've talked about this in the past, sort of the issues of automated benchmarking is that if you're not really sitting there and looking at a lot of the benchmark passes, it's even less likely that you'll notice some of these issues. Like for some games, you do have to play them for a significant amount of time before you notice these issues, which may not be feasible with the standard benchmarking, short benchmark passes. But then other games, it is noticeable much more quickly into the game. And if you're just hitting a button and walking away, it makes it even less likely that you'll find visual differences between games. It's just going to require a mixture of different testing methods and approaches as we go forward into this transition era. I'm hoping there'll be a future where, again, we could sort of dial back that sort of stuff and it'll just become all games sort of run fine because VRAM capacities are good enough. But at the moment, it's going to have to be that mixture of looking at benchmark performance, 1% low performance for stuttering, frame time charts, and also the visual comparisons, which I think is... made your reviews for those products a lot stronger. So looking at all those different angles and showing what's been going on.
Yeah, it's a lot more work, but I love it. It's fun. So we've enjoyed it. Since DLSS 3 Competitor is taking a long time to release, and probably by then more games will have DLSS 3, so frame generation, possibly other features will be added. How much value do you think it adds to NVIDIA cards? So what premium should you pay for frame generation and DLSS in general, I suppose? It also seems to improve performance on bad PC ports. Can do. Obviously, it's not supposed to be a selling point. Did I read that right? But the recent issue on AMD sponsored titles got me thinking a lot about this. Well, it's definitely meant to be the selling point. So I think that... I read that right, didn't I? Obviously, it's not supposed to be a selling point. So
it's a selling
DLSS 3 frame generation is meant to be the selling point on the Ada Lovelace generation, the GeForce 40 series. That's what it's all about.
So I think definitely with DLSS 2, that's now at a point where it's definitely a selling point, especially after looking into it across that number of games. If you're playing at 1440p especially, I think it's definitely a significant...
1440p and up.
DLSS, relative to FSR, DLSS is better at lower resolutions.
Okay,
So I think if you're playing at 1440p, then DLSS is significantly better than FSR. So that's definitely something to think about. If you're gaming at 4K, it's closer, so it's less of a thing to sort of think about in terms of the battle there.
What about 1080p?
At 1080p, it's like, I find it hard to recommend using it.
Okay.
But it's definitely still better on DLSS if you are going to use it. DLSS is better than FSR there as well.
But you recommend just having enough performance to run without an upscaler?
I would be gunning for that if at all possible. For DLSS 2, definitely a selling point. I think that's why we often say that AMD GPUs need to be priced a little bit lower than an NVIDIA card for the same level of performance, is because DLSS does offer that better experience. And again, for a lot of mid-range gamers, you're going to be more likely playing at 1440p than 4K, so it makes more impact. I think for DLSS 3, as we've talked about in sort of I think we've made 2 videos on it now, the original video and the updated video. it's still in a position where it's only going to have an impact some of the time. So DLSS generally is going to improve multiplayer and single player gaming in a wide variety of circumstances, whereas DLSS 3, there's a much more limited range. So you have to sort of figure out, are you in the zone or are you not in the zone? And for a gamer like you, Steve, playing Fortnite, you're definitely not in the zone.
I don't play Fortnite, but I like multiplayer games. But yeah, it's, as you're saying, it's not useful for multiplayer gamers, especially sort of more competitive multiplayer gaming.
Sure.
You wouldn't use frame generation, is what you're saying, which is accurate.
Not in its current state.
And then for single player games, it's sort of what frame rate you're at as to how useful it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like what sort of card performance you've got, how CPU limited you are. Like while I would ideally like CPU limits to be resolved not using something like frame generation, if that is the situation that you're in, then yeah, it's great in a game like Flight Simulator, for example. It works really well. It's not a super fast-paced game. Yeah, it's just a great experience there. So again, it really comes down to, with a feature like that, how much you're specifically going to be using it. Same with things like video encoding. You know, NVIDIA always gets talked about as having that superior video encoder, but if you never stream games, you never capture gameplay. I'm someone who basically never uses that feature on my GPU, then it's going to be weighted down. It's not going to be an important thing. So I just really don't care. So that's where I sort of see it. There are some features with both of these brands that sort of go into all areas of gaming. Like the software, like Radeon software, for example, I think is significantly better than the NVIDIA control panel. And that sort of, I do tend to use that relatively often. Like it's just nicer to use to sub features and things. So that's something where you're like, okay, that impacts the overall experience. But for DLSS 3, it's like you may never use it.
That's right.
So yeah, you're just going to have to weigh that up. And it's a case by case thing that makes it very difficult to draw big conclusions about. Like anything really, it's like, and it depends on your circumstances and how you use a product.
DLSS 3 frame generation, in my opinion, is heavily overhyped for most gamers. Because I myself would never ever use it. I'd never turn it on because, as I said, I mostly play multiplayer games, mostly competitive multiplayer games. So latency's at a premium, and I want frames. I don't want frame smoothing. I want actual frames with input included. So frame generation is completely useless, whether it comes from AMD in the future or NVIDIA right now. Completely useless for me, and that will apply for not most gamers. That'll apply for a lot of gamers. And then there are a lot of gamers who just don't want a frame smoothing technology. But, you know, it does boost the frame rate numbers, which is, you know, a key selling point on benchmark graphs for NVIDIA, because it makes their cards look way faster than maybe they really are. But it's an impressive technology. It's just, it's not for everyone or every use case.
And I've used it across a range of different games, and it even comes down to the type of game. Not even just like, you could lock two games at a similar frame rate, and even then DLSS 3 has a different impact. Like I found in a game like Cyberpunk, which is first person, that the latency of DLSS 3 sort of made it a bit more rubbery feeling in terms of its almost like mouse smoothing was enabled, as opposed to a game like Hogwarts Legacy, which was third person, and I played that a significant chunk of that with DLSS 3 on just to see what it would be like. I found that just the style of game made the latency issues feel less impactful, probably because of the third-person view. You're not jerking the camera around as much because you've got a wider field of view, so you can generally see more things in that style of game. So again, it really makes a big, it's really hard to draw a conclusion on, because I wouldn't use it in Cyberpunk, but I would consider using it for Hogwarts. And there are other sorts of games where, you know, like Diablo 4, it's in Diablo 4, I believe, but the frame rate in that game's so high, generally on my system anyway, that I wouldn't consider using it. So again, it's very difficult to sort of say you must have that or you must not have that. It's sort of case by case.
There's absolutely going to be people out there who love DLSS 3 and it's great for them. It's a game changer, really improves their game experience. Sure, I fully appreciate that and accept that. But there's also a lot of people who aren't interested in it, or it's completely useless to them. So when you're reviewing a product, you have to be mindful that you're reviewing it for some people who could not care less about DLSS 3. It's a complete waste of time for them. And then there are other people who are going to find it really useful. So
exactly.
You have to manage that when you're doing your review.
And I think we're talking about these features. You want to give a very balanced sort of conclusion to that to that, especially if it's like a case-by-case basis. We don't want to say that everyone should use it, because then you will get users who buy that product specifically for that feature thinking this is going to be the game changer for them. And then they use it and they're like, I'm not as sold on that feature. And that sort of, it takes away from the usefulness of the review. They're going to, that viewer is going to be a bit stung by that sort of conclusion.
Yeah, it's also,
whereas if we sort of give a more balanced feedback based on considering a whole variety of factors, and then it turns out that you love that feature, that's awesome, right? Like you've gotten a great conclusion for yourself. You've seen that we're sort of had this balanced, mixed sort of take on it. Works sometimes, works not as well at other times, and you think it's great. Well, that's awesome. Like that's the ideal outcome basically for you as a viewer of the content. And I think that applies to anything that we make a sort of balanced, mixed opinion on. So yeah, that's DLSS 3 at the moment. Now, hopefully there's ways that they can take it to that next level and make it a really compelling feature for all gamers working across a whole variety of games really well. But it will take a bit of work from here to see what they can do there. So we'll see. All right, and that will do us for part 2 of this Q&A series. There will be a part 3 on the channel, because just looking over the question list, there's still quite a few things that we want to be getting to, because this month you guys have asked quite a decent range of questions between the Discord community and just the YouTube community tab. Now, if you do want to submit questions to the Discord community, you're going to have to become a Patreon or Floatplane member of Hardware Unboxed. You won't just get the Discord community though, which admittedly is a great place to chat about tech. You'll get a monthly live stream, which we're just about to do after filming this, but there's always next month. BTS videos, other things, I think, something like that.
Discord server, behind the scenes content, Q&As, and live streams.
That's the main thing. Yeah,
that's the main stuff we do.
The main stuff.
There's possibly other things.
There's probably a few other bonuses that I just can't remember at the moment. But anyway, Patreon, Floatplane, great places to sign up. Thank you everyone for watching this video to the end. We really do appreciate it. You can always subscribe to the channel if you want to see that next part. And until then, I'm your host Tim.
I'm your host Steve.
We'll see you in the next one.